Hello, Gaz Williams here for Sonic Lab, and today we are looking at the new pocket operators. Now you see I'm wearing a pocket operator here. This kind of gives me exclusive entrance into any hipster social club worldwide. Anyway, so last year we met the pocket operators for the first time. We met the rhythm, the bass, and the factory, which was essentially like a lead synthesizer, and those were as conventional as teenage engineering get, but kind of, you know, they sort of made sense. Now this year they've brought out 3 new models, and these new models are the Robot, the Arcade, and the Office. What are they? So a lot less clear as to what the roles of these new devices actually are. But we're going to have a little look at them and in turn just explore what the differences are and why you may or may not be interested in them. So we can see them here in their rather fetching packaging. I know I've had to rip these open already. You sort of tear off a strip to kind of get into them. Whoops. And a little bit of instructions inside. And they come with a folded sheet of instructions too. And ostensibly they are circuit boards, bare bone circuit boards really, with a couple of knobs and 16 buttons here, which are flanked by some sound pattern BPM buttons. And along here we got play and sort of our right button, or you could think of it as like a record button, and an effects button. And this top corner here is a special button that is different on every unit, and it's its superpower. And in the case of the Arcade, it's called Chord. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this into its silicon case. Now the silicon case is an optional extra, and a very expensive optional extra, I have to say. That the units themselves retail at €69, but the cases are like €39, so they're kind of quite expensive, the cases. But last year when we did the reviews, the cases weren't available just at the time that we did the review, so I didn't I didn't cover them, but now I think it's an important aspect to feature in the review, because I think it does actually increase their usability by, in my opinion, a significant amount. Here we see our new models now in their respective cases, and they are color-coded, so the knob caps match the buttons on them, which makes them look really smart, and you can see that the graphics on each key specifically relate to the units there. So I've got plugged in now the Robot, which is probably the most conventional out of the new 3 models, and the Robot is kind of like a synthesizer. Let's have a listen to it. You might have noticed a little spicy note creeping in there. Something that was maybe disappointing to people about last year's models were the fact that they were fixed into C major, and you couldn't really change the key. There were a few ways to kind of cheat it a little bit, but ultimately I think they fixed them into keys, so when you connect them up to jam together, it keeps them all playing nicely. But what they've done with this one is they've added a G sharp, so that just kind of gives a little chromatic-y blues quality, a jazzy quality, I guess, to it. But what we can hear as we're playing though, I've got here in its special superpower is a glide button. So I can press the glide button and it'll add a bit of portamento to it. The glide function can also be sequenced because each pocket operator has a 16-step sequence, which again, I urge anybody to look at last year's series to get a real nice in-depth view at what they did last year, because essentially the new ones follow the same format. Coming back to the Robot though, what we've got though is we've got 8 different sounds. Each sound is duplicated in a high octave and a low octave. So choosing sound 1 in the upper octave, it goes the range from to. And then I could pick now the equivalent button here, and So the range is definitely geared more for lead synth kind of range. Okay, quick flick through some of the other sounds. Okay, and then the equivalent in its lower octave. Bit of glide. Sound 3. Sound 4. Ooh, it's nice, this sound. And again, when you're using it in real-time mode, just changing the knobs will sort of do different things depending on the sounds. Let's move on. Here, this one's actually got a built-in delay. Okay, quite chiptune-y some of these sound, don't they? Okay. And our final sound isn't actually a single sound, but is a drum kit. So this one sound here doesn't have an equivalent in the lower octave, but it has 16 drum sounds. Now, the other models in last year, the Factory and the Bass, they also had a drum kit there. And that's quite nice because it means that you can program drum beats in to play along with your pattern. So if I was to set off a pattern here, so we can hear some drums, and then I'm able to nice. That G sharp. The G sharp just does add a little spicy little flavour into the mix there. Another notable difference between this one and last year's models is that the effects button works more or less in the same way, in that you can apply these effects, they call them punch-in effects, into your sequence. So if I play a sequence, let's find a different sequence. And they record those effects directly when you push them in. They record straight away. But this one actually is quite interesting in that you can choose some effects. They'll work in the real-time mode. So, for instance, here I can choose this one, and there's like a kind of moving filter. Speaking of new features though, all three of the new Pocket operators benefit from the fact that you can now chain up to 128 patterns. In the originals, you could only chain 16 patterns. And like all of the others in the range, both the old ones and the new ones, they can be parameter locked. So when you record a sequence in, you can then actually apply movements to the knobs, and you can kind of automate that. So, for instance, I can imagine that lovers of chiptunes and that kind of thing may see instant use for this. Other people might think it's a bit too limited in its palette and its sounds, but this is the thing about the Pocket Operator range, both last year's and this year's. They are very specific, quirky devices that, you know, some of you will love and some of you will probably hate. Okay, I'm going to now plug in the Office. So you can hear this is quite a strange one. It's made up of samples of 1980s office equipment and floppy disk drives and dot matrix printers and the like. And in fact, there's a little backstory where there's an audio engineer who's nipped in to record everything whilst everybody's out for lunch. Each of the sounds then, like for instance the floppy disk drive, when I change the parameter knob, it sort of simulates just the sounds that like in this case, the disk drive was making. You know, and you might think, what a load of nonsense. But these textures actually sound really good when you lay them with other sounds. But again, they have this same sequencer function that the other ones have. And like if I play a sequence again, it's quite glitchy. And there's a texture to these sounds, which I personally really like. It does have a special function like the others, and that special function is a solo button, which doesn't sound that exciting, but when I play something, I hold solo, let go, everything comes back in, but I can hold a few buttons down and it'll solo however many buttons I've gone down. So it's quite a simple thing, but there's a lot of playability with that function. Now the Office, as I was mentioning, is a bit of a quirky one. There is one sound here which when you can get lots of pitches on that, and that isn't locked into key. So that does allow you to sequence melodies, although you'd have to do it all by ear. There's no visual indicator what notes those actually are. But other than that, that's pretty much it with the Office. It's just a strange, quirky collection of sounds, but when it all comes together, it gets quite an exciting texture. Okay, I'm now going to swap to our last model of the new range, which is the Arcade. And this one seems to be the most popular one so far from what I've been reading, because it does maybe a little bit more than any of the other models so far. Now, it's called the Arcade, and you'll hear why. So now, if I play some of the sounds, I'm sure you'd be familiar with those sounds as like 1980s arcade machine sounds. And when I play the knot, so they're quite quirky sounds. They are quite quirky sounds, arcade sounds, but there's a special trick up the sleeve of this one, and that is its chord functionality. And its chord functionality is quite a strange one. So I'm going to play a track. Now if I hold the chord button, There's a nice little fade out you can do there as well on it. So the way it sort of works is that there are predefined chords that you hold the chord button down, and each of the 16 buttons has a different chord. And we can see the name of the chord helpfully scrolling in the little graphic there of the arcade machine. And we can see each of the names of those chords. And that's quite cool. So it allows us to bring in like a chord drone over our little sequence that then can be transposed on the fly. So that does give an extra songwriter quality to it, which I think has maybe been missing in the other models. So I think that's quite cool. The sounds themselves are surprisingly durable when you start playing around with them. That's a simple... And like some of these helpfully, it tells me what note. So you can sequence each and every step of these. So you can have a single sequence can be quite a busy thing going on this one. So maybe more so than any of the other ones. You can make the most full sounding standalone music with the Arcade, and I think that is something to be applauded. Another accessory that Teenage Engineering sell are these mini little Chap cables, and they're €15 for the 3, which is okay-ish, I guess, but they are very small, and I think you'll probably find it hard to find these little cables anywhere else. And what these cables ostensibly are for are to connect up each of the units, which can pass through the sound and a sync pulse, so you can join them all together and start to have a jam with them. So let's set that up. So here we've got them all connected, and you have to be aware that the sync mode necessary is really important. You hold down solo and hit the metronome button and you cycle through various sync modes. I recommend keeping hold of the little instruction sheet that comes with it, because it explains what the different sync modes mean, because you can use them in various different orders and syncing them in different ways. Here, for instance, we've got the clock at the beginning, sending clock down to the middle one, and in the bottom one is set so it receives the clock but sends the audio out without a click. And the way it works is the left channel has, I think, the click, and the right channel has the audio, or the other way around, I'm not sure, but it uses the stereo to carry a click and audio on the other side. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to chain a bunch of patterns together. All of them have got this functionality. So I hold down the pattern button, I'm going to hit pattern 1 twice, pattern 3 twice, and then pattern 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so now when I play it, pattern 1, move into pattern 3 now. Going into our monster pattern 2. Okay, go into the bring in the Arcade now. So you can see they're lots of fun once you connect them up, but there is a slight price to pay for this, and that is that the audio, as it gets passed from unit to unit, the volume control, which we set by holding down the BPM button, and then the little LED lights light up, which show us what the volumes are set to. Up to 16 volumes are available, but the final unit sets what the overall volume is, so it does get a little bit awkward, and the sound does distort as you pass it down the chain. I mean, it's okay for small little jams, but if you wanted to record them seriously in any way, then what you need to do is find a different way to send the clock. And here's a good little tip. Here is an inexpensive little headphone distributor. Here you can use this. You could send out the clock to the inputs, and then you could take the audio outputs individually from each unit and into your audio interface. Another tip is that you can use something like a Volca. I've got the Volca sample here, and usefully the sync pulse coming out of the Volca is exactly the right sync pulse for the pocket operators. So you could have the Volca sample at the beginning of the chain, taking the sync out, putting them all into the correct sync modes, and then you could have the Volca as your master time. But what's really cool about that is the Volca has a MIDI in, so you could have MIDI coming from a computer or something, and therefore you could then send MIDI clock with the Volca acting as a clock kind of converter, MIDI clock converter into sync pulse. So that wraps up our review of the new series of pocket operators, and I think that, like the first set, I think they're great fun. Their use is sort of limited, but maybe exactly what you're looking for a particular texture, maybe. They might be exactly not the thing you're looking for, so stay away. I think the basic unit price is reasonably affordable. However, when you factor in my opinion, the necessary cases, I really feel that they are essential, then the price does start to look slightly on the high side. However, the cases are beautifully made and they do aid terrifically to the playability of these units. And something that has to be said, a friend of mine observed this with them. He said that they do really make you want to play and manipulate them. They're not the sort of thing that you just press and leave them do their thing. You really get the best out of them when you are tweaking and adjusting and playing with them. And I think that is one of their great strengths. So that's it from me, Gaz Williams. This has been Sonic Lab for Sonic State. Catch you next time.